Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the American Family Insurance DreamBank, where we believe in the transformative power of dreams. My name is Megan, and I'm a dream curator here at DreamBank. And on behalf of our entire team, we're thrilled to have you with us to learn today. For those of you who have attended our virtual or in-person events in the past, welcome back. And for those of you who are joining us possibly for your very first time, I'm going to take a brief moment just to introduce you to who DreamBank is. Here at American Family Insurance, we believe communities are stronger and the future is brighter when people are actively pursuing their dreams. And that's why we created DreamBank, to serve as an inspirational community destination and digital experience dedicated to dreamers everywhere. From our daily event series to immersive signature programs, there's something for every dreamer. Our offerings are designed to help you celebrate the dream journey, overcome obstacles, and stay motivated. Now, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Today, we have Joey, who has been practicing mindfulness and meditation for many years. Over 5 years ago, Joey's desire to dig deeper into these practices increased when his wife became sick with a severe case of fibromyalgia. In a very short time, work and home life were turned upside down, and the importance of self-care became increasingly clear. As anxiety, fear, worry, and exhaustion began to engulf him, Joey realized that self-care is not selfish, it's a necessary in order to maintain one's mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health, and effectively serve others. These experiences have led Joey to begin hosting his Guts podcast and facilitate workshops that focus on mindfulness, meditation, self-care, and relationships, including the relationship we have with ourselves. His goal is to share his experiences and what he's learned in order to help others on their path. Joey, we are delighted to have you join us today and be a part of this conversation. We welcome you to the DreamBank stage at this time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we were both enabling me at the same time. So hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you, Megan, for the introduction. And yeah, my name is Joey Donovan Guido. And today we're going to be talking all about self-care for caregivers. And as Megan mentioned in the brief bio, I am a caregiver. And what I've noticed is that a lot of the time, myself for a spell, and also other caregivers that I know, don't really take the best care of themselves. And as you'll see from some stories and some methodologies that you can practice and customize for yourself, it's really important that we do have self-care practices that are sustainable and that work for us. So what's interesting about this workshop, and even though it's geared toward caregivers, what we're going to talk about today works really in every aspect of your life, personal life, work life, and of course, as a caregiver. And it's also something that you can, as you start to learn it and practice it, it's something that you can share with the people you are a caregiver for, and it can help them too. And it's really important to note that this is all very customizable. I'm going to share what I've learned, what I've discovered, what I practice. But really, you can try it and it might work perfect for you, or you might need to modify or find something that might be quite different that works for you. And that's okay. This is not about following things to the letter. It's about following what is sustainable for you that actually helps you. And with that, I'd like to start off with the first topic, which is anxiety, worry, and fear. And really, when we're talking about these things, anxiety and worry are kind of a little bit ambiguous, right? They can kind of be the same thing to some degree. And what I find is that both of them oftentimes are really connected to fear on a deeper level. We're having anxiety about something that might happen, worry, but really it's fear. So I'd like to start off with a story that helps ground who I am and how I came to be the person presenting to you today. And it's really about my wife's health, which in 2017 took a turn for the worse, and where I became a caregiver unknowingly overnight. So we're on vacation, and my wife started to have pain. And by the end of the night, she had all blotches all over her body, and she was having trouble moving. And at one point, she was paralyzed, just laying in the hotel bed. We didn't know what was going on. So, of course, we came straight home, went to emergency care, went to a bunch of doctor appointments, and it turns out she has something called fibromyalgia. And it's a pretty severe case. There were quite a few weeks where she could barely walk, she couldn't work or really do much else but lay in bed. And my wife had health problems in the past, but they had kind of come and gone. She had a gallbladder removed and things like that. But it'd be like a minor surgery, and a couple of weeks later, we'd be back to quote unquote normal. This was different. This perseverated on and on for weeks and weeks, and all of a sudden it was many months in. And at about the 4th month, I was still trying to adjust, and I was not taking care of myself. And there was one night in particular where I was cooking dinner, and I had taken on all the shopping and the cooking. And I'm no Bobby Flay. I don't like to cook. So it was not something where I was psyched about. But of course I did it to feed my wife and my two boys. And there was one night where I was cooking, and I would typically have a shot of bourbon before, during, or after cooking. Not a big drinker, always took one little glass of it, and that was it. But I had noticed with this illness, I had started to have more. And on this one evening, I had about 1/3 of a bottle of bourbon, which was very uncharacteristic of me. And I got sick, and the family knew about it. And I decided in that moment that I was done. I was done drinking to cope, because that's what I was seeing was happening, right? This was starting to become more of a thing. And I didn't want to be that kind of a dad. I didn't want to be that kind of a husband. And I didn't want to be that kind of a man who turned to that to cope. I knew it wasn't healthy. And this is one of the things when I do these workshops, there are participants who do struggle with being a caregiver. And sometimes these habits can start to manifest. And so you might be wondering, Joey, what did you do to counter what was happening in your life with this disease? And that's what this whole workshop is about. I realized in that moment that I was not taking care of myself. In fact, I was ignoring my needs completely. And I was basically falling apart at the seams. And I realized if I didn't take care of myself, I wouldn't be good any good to my wife or kids, to my clients. I also run a web design firm. I wouldn't be any good to my friends or the rest of my family. And so that's what I did. I started to put together a self-care plan. And I'm going to share a lot of it with you today. Some of it is things that you would expect, things like exercise, meditation, and things like that. But a lot of what I did was also diving into understanding myself and how I was coping or not coping with the situation that presented itself to me. All of a sudden being this caregiver. When previous to that, yes, we still had kids, but it was very equal parenting between the two of us, and equal in every way as husband and wife, as partners. And all of a sudden there was this huge shift. So back to anxiety, worry, and fear. A lot of this came up for me. What was going on, when or if it would end. Fear of my wife dying, right? Really heavy stuff. And stepping back a little bit from that and talking about anxiety, worry, and fear more broadly, they can be thoughts, emotions, or both. All right. So anxiety and worry and fear can be a thought or an emotion or both. And one of the big things I want to share with you guys today that I learned really not that long ago is that your thoughts and emotions are not you. Let me repeat that. Your thoughts and emotions are not you. They are something you experience. Okay. And for me, that was something that took me a little while to wrap my head around, because I always, for years and years, referred to things like I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling anxious, right? Or my feelings, my thoughts. I took ownership of them and truly believed that they were me. So shifting our language is the first way that we can start to look at these things more objectively and give a little space between the thought or the emotion and ourselves. So really, instead of saying my feelings or my thoughts, what I did was I started shifting the language to I am feeling yada, yada, yada. I am thinking yada, 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 or I'm experiencing, right? And then once I started to look at things that way, I started to realize that this was something that was, yes, I'm experiencing it. And it's also not who I am. It's not my eternal self, for lack of a better phrase. So what happens is when we use language that's possessive of our thoughts and emotions, my feelings, my thoughts, this taps into something called ego. And if you're not familiar, I'll give you a definition of how I look at ego, how I've learned it. You know, most of my life, when someone used the word ego, it was something like where somebody maybe was bragging, right? They had a big ego and they would talk about, I'm the best, I'm awesome, I'm rich, or whatever, right? Or I'm the greatest of all time. That's something we hear sometimes sports people say, that they're the greatest, right? That's ego. When somebody is in the I, the ego is in the I am the greatest of all time. Something else that's called is like peacocking, like showing off, beating your chest, right? Kind of saying, hey, here I am, and I'm the GOAT, right? But ego can be a little bit more subtle as well. Ego can be attachment to your status in the world, to your job, to your possessions. You know, so a lot of times people will say, when you get to know somebody for the first time, they'll say, well, you know, what do you do? Right? And who we are becomes attached to our job or how much money we have in the bank. And we might start comparing ourselves to others, sometimes really unrealistically. That's ego. It's making this comparison to others or to your status. Something I learned more recently is that ego can also be a quiet little voice in your head that maybe thinks you're not good enough, or thinks, if I try this, I'll just fail, or I'm a loser. This is also ego. Now, don't get me wrong. These are all thoughts that human beings have. I'm not saying we shouldn't have them or that there's anything wrong with them. But I bring this up because I'm looking to define the difference between who you are as a being versus the things you experience, the thoughts and feelings that you have. So what happens with ego is anxiety and worry and fear feed it, right? So you're worried about a future event, or you're feeling remorse about the way you acted yesterday or last week, or sometimes 10 years ago about something. You start to perseverate on it, right? It becomes a loop maybe, or you're just feeling so strongly about an event that may or may not happen, right? You're worried about it. Maybe you've got a job interview. Maybe it is an actual event tomorrow. You've got a job interview and you really need that job. And you're worried and afraid that what if I don't get it? Ego feeds on that. And this doesn't mean you shouldn't or won't have these feelings or emotions, but it's about understanding them so you can make space to be in a better place and it's not taking up all of your bandwidth. So with the future stuff, when we're worried about things in the future, I know for me, sometimes I start thinking about, okay, I've got to take my wife to the doctor tomorrow. How am I going to get this work done that I'm behind on? What about going food shopping, cooking the dinner? And I start to think about this lineage of things that are happening in the future. And this takes us out of the present moment. And we're going to talk more about that as we move through the workshop today. So I just mentioned like making some more space or some bandwidth for something other than the thought or the emotion. And I'd like to give you guys an example of what I'm talking about when I mention this, because I feel like stories and examples are always the best way to, really make things memorable. So this is what I call the river analogy. And when you're having a very strong thought or emotion, whether it's worry, fear, anger, anxiety, or if you just, sometimes the thought can cause the anxiety. Like, what if I don't get this? What if I don't do well in the job interview tomorrow? And then that causes the anxiety. Sometimes there's just anxiety about something or generalized anxiety that starts to have you have thoughts that are kind of more anxiety producing, right? So it becomes a little loop. What the river analogy explains is that when we're having these strong thoughts or emotions, it can sometimes feel like we are up to our eyeballs in a raging river, right? And the river being the thoughts or emotions. They're just literally up to our eyeballs in it. And it can feel like there's nothing else but that anxiety, but that worry. Especially as a caregiver, it might be about our partner. It might be about a parent, a grandparent, a child, a friend. Could be about a pet. Of course, pets are part of our family too, right? So we literally feel like we are drowning in the river. So the thing is, as much as we might like to just get rid of that feeling that feels awful, that's not the goal here. The goal is to step out of the river, onto the river bank, and get yourself a little bit of distance, right? Get a few feet away from it. So now you can observe the river or the emotion or thought. Yes, it's still there. Yes, you're still feeling it. And you're no longer drowning in it. You can observe it. And this is something that might take a little bit of time to kind of digest and practice. But what's happening here is that as we create that space, as we're observing what's happening, it could be kind of weird because we're having the feeling or thought, and then we're observing ourselves. So it might be like, yeah, I'm really feeling upset about my wife's health, especially today because she couldn't get out of bed because of the amount of pain she was in. And all of a sudden, I realize, oh, okay. I'm observing that and feeling it. And before I got into the observer mode, I was actually in the river, right? It still happens to me, even though I've been practicing this for years. So, and by the way, if you guys have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to do some Q&A at the end of today's presentation. I really would love to address exactly your questions and what you've got going on. And if I can be of help, I would love to hear what you've got to share. So one of the things that happens when we are feeling all this emotion or thought is that we start to become distracted by it, right? So when we're drowning in the river, that's like all there is, right? We don't have anything else because it's just right in our face and that's all we see. And recently I started observing people as I was like driving to and from work, people at the park with their kids. We have a park just down the street, people walking their dogs, and even myself, and how I use this iPhone, this device. And I started noticing that the phone is a lot like ego, because both distract us from the present moment. If I'm worried about later today or tomorrow or next week, I'm not in the here and now. And this is what I will refer to as mindfulness, being in the present moment, consciousness. It's all different words for a very similar thing. And what happens? Somebody's at the park with their kid and they're on their phone and they're not in the present moment. They're distracted and they are literally sucked into this black hole of their phone. The phone can be an egocentric device. Why? Because it takes us out of the moment. And again, I'm not saying that the methodologies we talk about today are going to make it so you don't have any of these life experiences anymore. You're still going to feel, you're still going to get overwhelmed. My goal is to make it so that when you are having these feelings, when you are caring for somebody, how can we make it so you are in a more optimal place so you can function better and be more okay, not fixed, but more okay, so that you're not suffering as much and you're able to be a better caregiver. So I find ego for me is the most challenging thing to talk about because it's easy and hard to define at the same time. And one of the things is, I personify ego as if it's, got a personality, right? And like a lot of times I'll look at it and I'll see it almost like as Dobby from Harry Potter. Something that maybe ultimately is trying to help you, saying, hey, listen, this could be a problem tomorrow. You better prepare for what might happen, right? And really what happens is it's not helping us, right? It's causing us suffering, pain, stress. So it's not like your ego maybe is out to get you, but the ego can only have power if we are drowning in the river, when we are feeling and being in a place of unconsciousness where it feels like these thoughts and emotions are, we're submerged in them. That gives the ego power. So the question is, how do we make that space I've mentioned a couple of times so we can still experience these things, but have room for other stuff, right? One of the ways we do this is awareness of what's going on, right? Observing what's happening. But this is all connected to something else that I call resistance. Because if we're having a worry about something, and then we start to feel resistance to that thing. Let's use my wife's health as an example. I'm worried about her health, and then I'm also having this resistance that she's sick. And what resistance does is as it might make sense, it pushes us away from accepting what is. And resistance can also put us in a place where we are not fully in the moment. So the way I like to look at resistance is it's something that comes up. If someone tells you what to do, there might be an immediate resistance like, oh yeah, don't tell me what to do, right? That's a very basic form of resistance. Whereas if somebody says, hey, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? How should we handle it? Now, resistance is much less likely to rear its head because you're being asked a question and you're being asked your opinion. So in life, when something comes up, like somebody gets sick, you weren't really asked, what's your opinion here? It just came into your life. And we can also often feel resistance to that occurrence when it happens. So for me, resistance is multi-layered. So like cooking breakfast is something I have resistance to. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't like to cook. So there's resistance on that level. So in the morning, I get up, I exercise, I meditate, and then I go and get to cook. And as soon as I go into the kitchen, I start feeling this resistance to cooking. And I realize it's not just about the fact that I don't like to cook. It's about the fact that my wife is not well enough to cook that meal. And then that brings up the resistance I have to her illness, to the situation, to the fact that I don't want to have to be a caregiver. I didn't choose this. And all of a sudden, this resistance starts to mount and become stronger. Resistance can be to a future event or something that might happen. And we've talked about that a bit. That's fear and worry. What's a future-centric concern? How am I going to do this next week? Or what if my wife dies? There's resistance. There's to that future event, which may or may not happen, right? There's resistance to something that is, like whatever condition the person you are a caregiver is experiencing. And this is going to run the gamut, right? Because if you're a nurse or a doctor or a caregiver of some kind, massage therapist, potentially a psychotherapist, right? Psychiatrist, that's caregiver. And that's going to have different stressors and different triggers for you, different trauma that might come upon you as a caregiver than might occur with someone who is caring for their parent or their spouse, right? But either way, we need to learn how to cope with the caregiver role in a way that's healthy. Being aware of what you're feeling, of what you're thinking, of observing it. That's one way. Noticing when you're feeling resistance, even if it doesn't go away, that's okay. The fact that you are observing yourself or noticing that you are resistant to X, Y, and Z is progress. And it's very important to be kind to yourself as you work through this, because it's not going to be perfect. And I don't know if it ever gets to a point where you just feel all right all the time, right? That's not realistic, and that's not the goal. So being kind, even if you realize an hour into it, holy cow, I have been in that river about whatever. It's okay. Now you're observing it. Now you're in more of a place of mindfulness or consciousness. And the last thing that we need to do is beat ourselves up for being in the river for that amount of time, or being in resistance for that amount of time. The third type of resistance is something that's happened in the past. So oftentimes this will manifest as regret over a situation. I should have done that. I shouldn't have done that. Disappointment about something in the past. So what I've learned over the years is that resistance is flexible. It's like water. It'll fit into any situation that manifests. It really, we can resist anything. I know for me, sometimes I resist compliments. It's like, why would you do that? And I've got to examine it, right? When I'm in awareness of it, why am I resisting? Like somebody today, my wife, she said, you're going to do great today. You're going to get to help some people and work with them and share what you know so that they can use some of these practices to help themselves and their families and the people they're caring for. And she said, you're going to do great today. And I resisted that. Then I said, thank you, once I realized what I was doing. So, okay, we've talked about anxiety, fear, worry, thoughts, emotions. We've talked about what happens when resistance comes up. And now I want to talk about, well, how do we, if resistance is there, what do we do? How do we deal with it? And how do we deal with things that are long lasting? And what comes up next, what counters resistance or what transforms it is acceptance. Okay. And acceptance, the way I like to look at it, acceptance goes hand in hand for me with what I call the yes and philosophy. So let me share this with you. Because a lot of times people will say, how do you expect me to just let go of resisting something that's been there for 5 years? Let's say you're a caregiver for someone with a long-term illness, whether you're a therapist or a parent or a child, whatever. You know, how do you find acceptance week after week, month after month? And so the way I like to tackle this and share with you is, first of all, with a story, an example. And I call it the flat tire analogy. Okay. So let's say you're driving along, going somewhere. Let's make it somewhere fun. Let's make it to go get some fresh donuts. So you can have some coffee when you get home. I am a donut and a coffee guy. Love it. And that's one of the things that brings me joy, that I really savor. And oftentimes I'm having the coffee and donut with my family. So you're on your way to get donuts, and all of a sudden you got a flat tire. Now it's normal to feel resistant to that flat tire. Nobody sits there in their car and says, awesome, woohoo, I got a flat tire, right? It is absolutely normal and expected for the mind to think, darn, I got a flat tire, right? And there might be some resistance associated with that. Now, here's the thing. You can resist that flat tire for the next 1.5 years. And that resistance to the flat tire will not change anything. You can grumble about it, complain about it, use 4-letter words about it. But the fact is that you've got a flat tire. So if we can move at least somewhat, into acceptance, then we can say, yes, I have a flat tire. And that really stinks. I'm not happy about it, right? Those thoughts and emotions are still there. They are still valid. But we just want to make room so they're not just, all we see. So yes, I've got a flat tire, and what can I do about it? I can call AAA. I can change it, put the donut on. I can take a cab somewhere, just pull the car over if I need to, right? Or you can call sometimes like businesses like, Subaru, companies like Subaru or a Honda. If you're part of their program, they'll come and change your tire, right? So accepting that you have a flat tire, yes, I've got one, and what can I do about it? This gives you some power in the situation, and you're not stuck in that resistance mode. Now I understand something like a flat tire is a short-term life experience, right? I try not to call them problems or issues. I try not to label it, which can be difficult. So looking at it as a life experience, going back to also like thoughts and emotions, right? It's something I'm experiencing. It's not me. It's not who I am. My thoughts and emotions do not define me. Taking that one step further, my life situation does not define me. Yes, it's going to affect my existence. If you're having problems paying the bills or problems with a flat tire, oh, see, I went and did it. I called them problems. Great real life example of how easy it is to do that. So back to my point, what do you do when it's a longer term issue that you're dealing with, something different than a flat tire? In my case, with my wife being sick for just about 5.5 years now. And on top of it, more things have happened since the fibro. She's had diabetes for years. Now she's got a fatty liver. She's got some kidney failure. She's having severe eye problems where we have to go to the eye doctor once a month, where she has procedures done to help her see. This is a lot. And I'm not sharing this to complain. I'm sharing this because you are in your own situation with your own set of life experiences and challenges. And sometimes it can feel like Jenga, right? Like real life Jenga. And there's all this stuff getting stacked on top of each other. And you're looking at it, you're like, how do I deal with this? Joey's saying to accept this. I don't want to accept this. Right? So how do we do this when things are long-standing? And the answer is as best as possible. So let me explain this a little more. I don't look at resistance and acceptance as like two sides of the coin or black and white. I look at it as almost like a sliding scale, right? Remember back in the day when there was like equalizers on your stereo? I'm dating myself. So, there was a kind of a sliding scale, like from one end to the other, maybe with like resistance being on this end and acceptance being all the way here. And really, whether it's a short-term challenge or a long-term challenge, the expectation that we can get ourselves to a place of acceptance every minute of every day, day after day, for years, is unfair and unkind to ourselves. So looking at it as a scale, when we're observing that, yeah, I'm feeling resistant, I'm feeling upset or angry about this life situation. Observing it immediately gives us some distance from it. So we have a little bit of space to breathe. And then it's more about, okay, taking that breath, literally stopping and taking a deep breath. And feeling what that breath feels like in our bodies. And looking to be in acceptance as best as possible in that moment. Because the resistance might not go away completely. One of the methodologies I use to do this is it takes a couple minutes sometimes until it starts to become habit, and then it takes less time, and then sometimes it almost becomes unconscious in a good way. It just plays itself out as a habit, as a positive habit, where I'll say, okay, I am feeling resistant to this. Like, let's take my wife doesn't feel well, so she needs to lay down. And I see she's struggling. I see she's in pain. That's real hard to just accept. So I use the yes and philosophy. I say, okay, I'm feeling resistance to the fact that she's in bed feeling awful. Yes, I'm feeling this. And what can I do about it? Now, mind you, sometimes there is nothing you can do about it. Unlike the flat tire, right? That's an easy one. Sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. Sometimes there is. So first determining that needs to happen. So, okay, yes, I'm upset that my wife is sick in bed. And what can I do about it? Okay, well, I gave her some heat on her neck and her back. That helped her. I take her to doctors when I need to. I support her in whatever ways I can. Does it fix it? No. But at least I'm being in awareness of what I am able to do. The hardest one is when you just feel powerless, right? That you feel like there's nothing you can do. Whether that's true or not, it's how it feels. And when that happens, one of the things you can do, again, is go to your breath. And it's not going to take the feeling or the trauma you're experiencing away from you or from the person you're caring for. But that breath helps you make space and helps connect you with your conscious self. Okay. And when you're in that more conscious place, more mindful, you can look at it a little bit more objectively. Again, it doesn't fix the illness or the issue that person is having. But when you look at that sliding scale, it's a little bit easier to accept things as much as you can in that moment. And I'd like to mention a couple of things about acceptance. Acceptance does not mean putting up the white flag and saying, all right, I give up. I guess that's it. Too bad for me and my person I'm caring for. It doesn't mean that. It means being in acceptance as best you can be right now. If that's 2%, it's 2%. It's better than 0, right? And taking this yes and philosophy along with the acceptance philosophy can help us think more clearly. So what happens is, if we're feeling resistance, or if we're feeling like we're up to our eyeballs in the river, we wind up in limbic mode. The limbic system of our brain, the fight or flight system, takes over. And, I keep talking about breath. And what's not really that funny is when we start to feel anxiety or resistance or any kind of strong emotion or thought, the breath is the first thing that starts to get affected. Chemicals actually release into our bloodstream, and our breathing becomes sporadic. It can become shallow. And as soon as that starts to happen, that actually exacerbates how we are feeling. Because short breath or erratic breath is something that can cause the anxiety to stick around or even have it begin. And it makes it really hard to do this simple thing to take slow, deep breaths. So the very thing that is our closest at hand, no matter where we are, solution, is often the first thing that anxiety or strong emotions takes away or tries to. So this is a real methodology that needs to be practiced in the moment, and start with small things. Let's say maybe, I don't know, a small irritation, like you're in a traffic jam, or somebody cuts you off on the road, or maybe you ran out of cream or half and half for your coffee, which, okay, that's a small inconvenience. Starting with those helps build the muscle, so to speak, of acceptance, of the yes and philosophy. All right, yes, I ran out of cream and I still have some milk. I'll use that today and I'll be sure to pick it up on my way home or whatever. So awareness and the yes and philosophy can go a long way in helping. And breath is your portal to consciousness. And I'd like to talk more about consciousness because I think it's a term that has many meanings. So consciousness could be like you're conscious, like you're awake, right? And this has many levels. Like right now, you guys watching this DreamBank workshop and myself, we're all conscious, we're all awake, we're not sleeping, right? But consciousness also means being in the moment, being in the present moment. That I am talking with you guys right now. And that's my focus. And that's the space I'm in. As opposed to worrying about what I need to do next. And if that's happening for you, that's okay. First thing is be aware of it, right? Try and accept it as best you can. Going back to kindness. I think that's one of the hardest things as we do this practice is we want to just be really good at it so we don't suffer. So consciousness is defined as being in the present moment, presence, mindfulness, which of course mindfulness is a type of meditation as well. But it's really being in the here and now, free of distraction. Because that's what a lot of these things are in life. All these things that we've got to do, all these things that we want to accomplish can be distraction from being in the moment. So we wind up living whole days and weeks and years worrying about the past, the future, this and that, and then our lives pass us by. And the moments like that coffee with my family, such a simple, apparently mundane thing, is such a gift. And I, for one, would rather enjoy that moment, enjoy that gift, enjoy that time, instead of being worried about something else that in that moment I can't even work on or don't want to work on or think about. So one of the first steps to a more conscious existence or a more mindful existence, we've talked about already. It's observing yourself. Observing yourself and just observing what you're experiencing. What I've started to notice is like, I'll see this, like I'll see myself standing on the riverbank, observing myself, right? seeing what's happening, observing myself feeling and thinking whatever I'm thinking. Sometimes I'm observing myself experiencing the thought and emotion. And I call that super consciousness. And that I define that as kind of our beingness, something that goes beyond our personality, beyond our thoughts, beyond our bodies. That is the part of us that is eternal, that is part of the universe. Because just as our bodies have billions of cells, and each of those cells has components, and they make up organs and arms and legs and eyes, what I have found is that we are part of a greater whole, just like those cells in the body. We're connected, call it spiritually, energetically. And this consciousness is kind of what is the pipeline to that, right? So again, the breath is something that brings us to this place of consciousness. It's most readily available. So we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to dive now into self-care strategies and practices. Now, we've been talking all this time really about self-care, right? Looking at things, becoming the observer, understanding awareness, understanding consciousness and resistance and acceptance. But I want to get a little bit more granular about the things you can actually do on a daily basis for self-care. And of course, I'm going to lead off with a question. And this is a question I would love for you guys to write down if you've got a pencil or pen and paper in front of you. This is going to be something I ask of you, if you don't mind, to think about after this workshop is over. Are you having your needs met? Are you having your needs met? Because as a caregiver, what can oftentimes happen is that we're so busy caring for others that our needs are not addressed. They're not verbalized. So we don't even give the chance to somebody else to fulfill the need. And what I realized as I started to be in consciousness about this is that taking care of others shouldn't mean we suffer. Taking care of others shouldn't cause us suffering. And a quick example of that is going back to cooking. There were some nights where I would go to cook dinner and I'm just really tired. And I would push through and cook. And then one day I was like, you know what? I don't need to do that. I can ask for help, or we can do takeout, right? And that's a small example of taking away suffering. Nobody's putting all this stuff on me. Sometimes I put it on myself. And I think as caregivers, we want to take care of everybody and take away their pain, take away their suffering, their struggle. And sometimes we can take it too far. And when we do that, we start causing our own problems or strife or suffering because we're not taking care of ourselves. Self-care is not selfish. It is a very important aspect of existence. Because if we're falling apart like I did early on with my wife's illness, we're no good to anybody, to ourselves, to the person we're caring for, to our families, to our friends, to our clients. So it's a big shift in perception of because we're told on a daily basis, serve others, right? It's in many spiritual practices. It's something that permeates, right? Serve others, especially if we're caregivers. We're here to serve others. And we become the forgotten ones. If you are caring for a partner who's really sick, Some of your needs might not be met. Things you may need to talk about, to have a sounding board. Intimacy might not be happening. And this list goes on and on. And it's important to understand that, yes, we may not be the person who is being cared for, and this is traumatic for us too. And we have needs, and if possible, we deserve, or we have the right to have them met, or at least try to have them met, right? To verbalize it. So answer that question. Sit down, make a list, and just really think about what needs that aren't being met, which ones can be met if you verbalize it. Or maybe you can just ask for help, let someone else mow the lawn, hire somebody, right? Sometimes there's simple solutions. And if we're in a place of mindfulness, we'll see them much better because we'll be using our frontal lobe and not stuck in limbic mode, okay? We've talked a lot about breath. The other way to provide self-care for yourself is what I call making space. And the best way I can explain this is a real estate story, right? So like your brain is like a piece of real estate, right? Whatever real estate you want, house, a building, whatever. And your thoughts, your emotions, your ego will take up every square foot of that space if you let it. It wants the whole thing. What we are looking to do with this work is, again, not to eradicate the thoughts and the feelings. They're going to be there. They're going to be there. Accepting that is part of the process. Yes, they're going to be there. And we can make more space in that piece of real estate for other things. So when I think about making space, it might be kind of putting that stuff that's challenging us in a particular room and saying, all right, I understand you're there. I acknowledge you. You're valid feeling, your valid thoughts. You got your room, I have mine. Maybe it's adding on to the house. However you envision it, however it helps you. For me, there was a time when I would think about white mats, like those karate mats or the gym mats that fold over, cushiony things. I would envision myself, because I would feel really crammed and just really tied up, almost like mummified sometimes, with no space. So I would start to envision myself standing on these mats, and they would start to unfold around me. And when I did that, usually I made space for breath and started to visualize myself in a larger space. So the thought and emotion, what I would often refer to as the barking dog, wasn't right on top of me. What works for you? You've got to try. Some other things I do, and again, these are suggestions, and I apologize, we might run a couple minutes over, so if you have to leave, you can always watch this recording later, but I will be done very shortly, I promise you. This is important though. Other tangible things you can do and modify, again, so they work for you. These are just examples of what I do. What did I do when I decided I wasn't drinking anymore and that I needed self-care? I started therapy with a good therapist. I still see him every other week to help me cope and deal with my life situation. I joined a men's group, and this can be a really powerful thing. You know, depending on how you identify, you might want to join a men's group or a women's group or a group of people who identify similar to you. So you're in a safe, supportive space where you can talk and be with people who are in a similar situation. Okay. Walking or exercising. I do something called the high intensity interval training every morning. It takes 15 minutes and I'm done. Walking, going to the gym, what works for you and what's sustainable for you, not just financially, but also for your body, and what do you enjoy doing? If you like running, great, run. If you hate running, find something else to get your body moving. Really briefly, what happens is when we do some form of movement, we do what's called metabolization of our stress. Just like our body digests food, when we exercise in some way, it helps us release the stress that we are feeling that is stuck in the body. You can do body work, massage, chiropractic, whatever you think works for you, whatever you want to give a try to. Other things are making time for what brings you joy or peace. For me, it's reading Lord of the Rings at night before I go to the bed. For you, it might be something else. Also, picking up some hobbies could be good. Something that is your own, that's separate from your caregiver role. For me, it's vinyl records, and I also love stationery. The thing with that is that we have to be careful, because if something's a hobby, it can easily transform into a coping mechanism where all of a sudden, instead of buying one vinyl record a month, you're buying one a week or two a week. And then all of a sudden it can become unhealthy. So it's really important to be in awareness. So if you've got these hobbies, are they serving me well? Are they bringing me joy? Is there a balance to it? And if you're starting to see it's out of balance, then it becomes just like any other habit that turns to the negative side. Some resources. If you want to learn more about this, you can go to the Guts podcast, Getting Under the Surface, and we talk about this quite often. You can also look up Eckhart Tolle, his book, A New Earth, Awakening to Your Life's Purpose, is amazing, and I highly recommend it. There's also a gentleman named Michael Stone, who is a yogi and also a mindfulness meditation practitioner. He's also very good. And if you want some more suggestions, you can go to joeydonovanguido.com, reach out to me in an email, and I'll be happy to respond to you and give you some more insight as to where you can find resources. And with that, I apologize, we're 3 minutes over, but I'm going to turn it back over to Megan.
Oh, Joey, what an incredible session, and resources and layers going through your story and the practices you've learned. So just thank you so much for your time and energy today and sharing that in order to help best support our community and all the caregivers and the variety of tasks that kind of involves. So I have not seen any Q&A come through, but I did have just one final question that we love to ask all of our individuals that are on our DreamBank. What is a piece of advice you have for someone who is pursuing a dream right now?
Yeah, and I love that question. And there's so many answers. I would say if you are pursuing a dream, I would say two things. One, chunk it down into bite-sized steps so they're manageable. Sometimes we often, we see a half-hour TV show and we see a resolution in 22 minutes if we don't count the commercials. And we think, oh yeah, we've got to get from A to Z in so fast. So chunk it down, keep your eye on the goal, but really kind of backward engineer it to see where you're at and where you need to start and what your next step to that goal is. If you keep it bite-sized and realistic, you can accomplish those goals one at a time. And then even if you can't see what's next, once you accomplish those first few, you'll start to see what's next. And I would say along with that, remember to be kind to yourself. That you're human, that there are limitations to being human and all the other things we have going on in life. So if you don't get something done in a day or you make a mistake, it's okay. Mistakes are future successes in disguise. So just learn from it and move on as best you can.
What a beautiful answer to that. I loved like comparing so easy, especially like the DIY shows of like 22 minutes and they have like redone
Mhm.
at home, or just as like so many examples of it too. And like it just it takes time. It takes those steps. Like we as humans are human beings, not human doing, and need to make that space for it. So again, Joey, on behalf of all of American Family Insurance and DreamBank, we look forward to hosting you again soon and all of those who tuned in today's event. I encourage you all to stay in the know at amfam.com/DreamBank and connect with us on social media to stay in the know on upcoming events. I know we have a few more coming up this year with Joey. I hope to see you all soon.